This forum on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It's my pleasure to be here tonight with Margarita and Bob, who have done a tremendous amount of work on this, along with the commissioners here. This is something that was attempted in 1988. The RTM rejected it back then. Almost 2 years, I just asked Bob, I said, about 2 years? He said, almost to the day that this was passed by the RTM. This is actually a wonderful thing. It's a tool that we have in our toolbox now to not only chip away at that 10% affordable mandate level that we want to get to, but it's something that shows the state that we're serious about this. Just in the last year alone, we went from about 5.3% to 5.8%. That's a big jump. That's the biggest jump we've had in a long time. God bless you. And big shout out to Greenwich Communities, formerly Greenwich Housing Authority. What they're doing is when they do projects, 100% of those units are going towards this. That's why 830G is horrible, because all it does is help a developer. 20%, 30%. It doesn't. The total number keeps expanding. It's like a dog chasing its tail. We're never going to get there with 830G. It was written by developers. Unfortunately, they have 4 lobbyists, paid lobbyists. At least they did the last few years up there. So you know where that's going. So we finally had some advocates who got together around the state, and they hired a lobbyist to help our legislators like Ryan Fazio, who was up there leading the way last year. And thank you for all your work there. I know I testified a lot on that and saw you on all of those meetings. It's important for our legislators to speak up on that. Not just to vote against it, but to speak up against it, because that is the single most important issue this is in our town, in our lifetimes. And it's not just about getting to the 10% affordable rate to get the state off our backs with the mandate, but it's also about doing the right thing for people. My grandmother, Rose Camillo, lived in Armstrong Court since its inception in, I think it was 1955, I think. She passed away in the 90s, but I spent many nights there. And so I know what it was like in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s in Greenwich. That's what affordable housing looked like then. Now, thanks to Greenwich Housing Authority, look at what it is now. It's beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful, and we're doing the right thing there. And so we want everybody here. We want people who live and work here. When I grew up in Greenwich, right, and when Lauren grew up here, right, the cops, the firemen, the teachers, they lived here, right? When you got in trouble, you were more scared that they were going to tell your father, right? You didn't worry about getting your name in the paper. You worried about getting home and getting a beating from your father. And so that was a big difference, right? But, as time went on and housing got really out of control with the prices, this is something that's important to us. So if we can get to that 10%, that's a big deal. You want to have people who live here and work here and have a stake in the community to be able to live here and not have to spend 70%, 60% of their income on housing. So along with Greenwich Communities, and again, we can't thank them enough, Bob and Margarita have been just stalwarts in helping with this. This is a huge thing, and I know people here who maybe we've disagreed with in the past on mandates from Hartford are supportive of this. So I think it's imperative that we give it 110%, this effort to help Greenwich Communities, to get Greenwich to that 10%. And not stop there, and to make sure that these units are maintained. And so again, if you're not familiar with 830G, this law came into effect in 1991. And so today, if you have units that are affordable, but you haven't put, I think it was $25,000 in the last 32 years, it's not counted. So we had a lot of these units that were not counted. And thanks to Greenwich Communities, all of Armstrong Court now, you've been by the courts, all of those units are going to be counted now. That's a big deal. And if you talk to the people there now, they're ecstatic. They just love it. And so our goal is to not only get to the 10%, but to get all of the units that we had that were built in the 50s and the 60s, to get them up to speed and up to par with Armstrong Court. That's a great community to live in. And Greenwich has always done the right thing. Greenwich established a housing authority in the 40s, long before a lot of towns did. So some of the arguments we heard from Hartford, from some of the legislators who never were even in Greenwich ever, they were wrong. Greenwich always cared deeply about this. But as as you know, as real estate got more and more expensive and times evolved and changed, it became harder to do this. But now we think we have a way to get there. And again, I'm going to turn it over to Bob and Margarita now. But from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for all you're doing on this, and we support you 200%.
Fred, that support is incredible. I want to. Can you? Is this on now?
The little red light has to be on.
The little red light is on.
That's got to be green.
No, it's a red light.
It's a red light. Margarita, who's been here before, says it's got to
I
be a
haven't
red
been here
light.
for almost 4 years, but
Yeah, it's on.
It's on. It's on. Thank you, Fred. That kind of support is what we need, and I'm very, very grateful, and I know everybody who is affiliated or associated with the trust is very grateful as well. What I'd like to do to start, after thanking you all for coming out on a rainy night to talk to us about this, is get Jenny to play for you a video that
push the red button.
I did. The red button is on.
Not getting the same sound.
The red button.
Is this any better?
They're red back then.
It's on.
Red button's on.
It's not the,
It's not.
It's definitely on.
the input for the video. I think I can switch it back maybe after we play the video. It took us a while to get the video to play with sound.
Well, I know for a total fact that he knows how to shout.
Or talk up.
Blame the Board of Selectmen, because it was working today, so we may have broken it.
It did. It worked today.
This was working.
This. Jenny, yes, this one is working. Yay, Jenny. So the Affordable Housing Trust, we were tasked with trying to getting the word out. What are we all about? We thought that one of the best ways to do it might be to commission a little video that tries to describe what we're doing. And so Jenny, if you would roll the tape, please.
Greenwich means something different to everybody.
It definitely brings me pride. It's the town that I grew up in, the town that gave me a lot.
It's the optimal, ideal place for people to want to have a family.
To me, it's the civic spirit. To me, it's second to none. I've visited most of the 169 municipalities in my life here. I haven't seen one like Greenwich yet.
Greenwich is like the dream place to be. It really is.
Welcome to Greenwich, a town filled with pride for its amenities, community, and natural beauty. Our town is a magnificent place, but one that comes at a cost. It is prohibitively expensive for many of our working families.
When I grew up, a lot of the policemen and firemen and teachers lived in town.
They used to know everybody, and it was like, oh, the son of somebody, the father of somebody. You just had different kind of connections that you no longer have.
I feel that if you're not spending time in town, then your vested interest in the town isn't there. So when you don't live in town, it makes it harder to have that vested interest.
Imagine if we could actually spend some time together outside of work, with our kids and with our families, just getting together. It's something that we no longer have that used to be here. So hopefully in the future we can have that again.
By ensuring our first responders, service workers, and teachers are not priced out of a life here, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was established to help develop housing that fits the needs of the town.
I would say one of the most significant roadblocks is time to come to town, time to spend in town.
Can I go somewhere else and have a better quality of life where I don't have to work so much just to pay my bills?
But at the end of the day, this is the town I grew up in and the town that I still care about and want to keep giving back to.
Working for Greenwich, it's like home to me because I grew up here. We work a lot of nights, a lot of weekends, a lot of holidays, and so ultimately we already miss a lot, and being closer will kind of help us close that gap with our families, but also to give more, to be better for the community that we serve as well.
You want to make sure that people who live here, want to raise a family here, can do so without expending 75% of their income.
A donation to the trust directly helps provide for those in our community who, day in and day out, provide for us. The trust is also the town's only tool to prevent large-scale development projects. which could bypass our local zoning through state legislation and alter the fabric of our town.
The Affordable Housing Trust is really the only tool that the town has to encourage developers of 8-30G projects to either build smaller buildings that don't put as much strain on traffic and our infrastructure, or alternatively, to give the town more affordable units than the law requires and to help us get to that 10% goal faster.
I believe that the lack of affordable housing is only going to create a bigger gap for either push out the people that are already in the lower bracket right now, completely just push them out of the community. And also, I think in the long run, it will also affect the quality of employees that you have.
It's a win-win. You want to make sure that people, to the best of your ability, can live here in the most affordable way, but also keep the mandates at bay because they're not good for anybody.
With a modest loan, the trust will enable developers to rent affordable units based on the income levels that exist in Greenwich, promoting further development of smaller, more suitable structures.
Anybody that lives in town has a stake in town. Whether you're living in a one-room apartment or a big mansion, you have a stake in it. This is a town that you live in, a town in many cases you're growing up in. And so having a place where people come from all different backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, religious, ethnic, I think only adds to the experience of growing up. If everybody was the same, you wouldn't get that.
The more people that we can get moving into this town that can afford it will make this town a better place.
It's lovely when you're walking around and you bump into people from all different walks of life. And everybody's just genuinely happy to be here because everybody that lives here is very fortunate to be here.
Whatever your motivation, we urge you to consider a generous tax-deductible contribution, which will be matched by the town from our share of federal COVID relief stimulus funds, and put directly towards paving the way for a better Greenwich for all. Thank you.
There, that I hope you think, share my opinion that does a pretty good job of stating most of the case for affordable housing. I want to make just a couple more points. People who work for relatively low hourly wages, think about your waitstaff, your kitchen workers, your hospital workers. In order to get to jobs in Greenwich, they have to drive a long distance, some of them, a very long distance, some of them. That is absolutely not good for the environment. It's not good for traffic. If we can find a way to increase housing stock in very close proximity to the jobs that we have here, that I think is going to be good for everybody. Good for the planet, good for our traffic, good for our community. Margarita, I don't want to sit here and talk all the time without you adding something. And Margarita did an enormous amount of data gathering about a year ago when we worked on the affordable housing plan that the RTM approved. One of the statistics that stuck with me coming out of that just stunned me, frankly, is that 7% of the population of Greenwich is below the poverty line. An additional 22% of the population doesn't earn enough money to meet what's called the federal basic cost of living standard in the area. They are what are called ALICE, asset limited, income constrained employed people. Those folks absolutely need to have some help getting housing that's affordable for them to live here. So we do have a need, and if we can address it, it will definitely help us. Let me turn now to describing what the Affordable Housing Trust is. It is a branch, a division, if you will, a segment of the government of the town of Greenwich. It was created by an ordinance adopted by the RTM almost a year ago exactly. It is composed of basically two sort of segments. It is a board of voting members of 7 people. I'm one of them. There are several of them out in the audience. Great many of these folks have experience professionally or personally with affordable housing. In addition to the 7-person board, there's, I think, an 11-person advisory committee drawn from various segments of the community who have an interest in or care about affordable housing. I consider one of the main functions of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to be a creator of public dialogue, if you will. I think meetings like this, and I'm so glad you all came, and the press reports that we're starting to get, I think are very important to get the conversation going more than it has been. But as you can imagine, what we hope most to accomplish is to deploy money to create additional units of affordable housing or preserve units that we currently have. Let me speak just briefly about our funding. When the trust was created, the thought was that initially we would set it up contemplating it would be funded with donations, meaning that we didn't want to muddy up the process of creating the trust with the much more fraught conversation about how to fund it. We wanted to set the body up and get it going, and then come back later and talk as a community about whether it made sense to fund it with tax dollars or with payments in lieu or of fees, any other ways that we could do it. Let's just get it set up, get some donations. We were blessed in the meantime with this thing called the American Rescue Plan Act. The federal government gave communities like Greenwich fairly large amounts of money from the stimulus program, the COVID stimulus program. The RTM and the BET approved for the trust fund $1.1 million in 2 segments. The first segment is $650,000 that the trust can use right now. The second segment is a $450,000 fund that will match dollar for dollar any contributions that come from the public. Today, as of right now, we have $33,800 in contributions. And that includes one $25,000 contribution from one of those folks that you might think of live in Greenwich who are very wealthy and very, very concerned about affordable housing. I just, while I'm on the topic, I've envelopes for each of you to take home. I forgot to stamp them, I'm sorry, but addressed to our town controller. You can deposit your check in it, and we will gladly accept your tax-deductible contribution, please. What have we done so far? I like to say that I think the trust has, in very broad strokes, 2 basic potential missions. One of them I think of as very simple to understand. Providing funds, that I'll talk about the economics more in a minute, providing funds to actually construct new units. The more affordable, the better. As Fred said, if we can build 100% affordable housing, that will help us get to the 10% goal. The other goal, which I think has gotten a little more attention, frankly, because it's more immediate, is to help the town encourage developers of 830G set-aside projects to build things that fit here better. Let me just spend a few minutes talking about that. When people say 830G, they typically mean actually a segment of that law that empowers developers in towns that do not have 10% of their housing stock qualifying as affordable under the state's definition to basically ignore zoning laws. If the developer builds a project that sets aside, that's why this is called a set-aside development, that sets aside 30% of their units to be rent and income restricted for 40 years at standards that work out to an average of 70% of the state median income. state median income. The state median income is more or less $100,000. Our area median income is about $60,000 higher than that. What that means is that in order to satisfy those standards, a developer has to dedicate 30% of their income stream to rent levels that frankly are economically crazy low. This is sort of what I've done for a living for a long, long time. That rent level translates to a number that really leaves almost no money after expenses. Almost no net income comes from that particular unit. It is very, very difficult to construct a project. If they were 100% affordable at that level, it would be impossible without assistance. So what the developers are obligated to do to make their numbers work is they have to layer on more and more and more of the market units to make the numbers work. The biggest single cost factor in any affordable housing development, in fact, any development here, is the land. The price of the land is the same if you build 1 story with 10 units or 100 stories with 1,000 units. It's the same. So that's why, that's the economics that drive the developers who come in with these proposals for large set-aside units to be so big. So what the trust has been doing is offering the developers an alternative. The set-aside provision is one facet of 830G. There's another facet, and that is called assisted housing. The assisted in that word means financial assistance. If a unit of government provides a developer with funding in the connection with the construction of their project, that development is entitled to the same freedom to not comply with zoning rules, but instead of the developer being restricted to 70% of state median income for their rents, the developer is obligated to follow whatever rent and income standards are provided by the government that provided the money. Think HUD. Think low-income housing tax credits. Is by far the biggest federal program to support housing this country has. Those programs come with rent and income standards that developers are obligated to follow. They do not have to follow what we think of as 830G, 70% of state median income. But the rules are clear that it's not just federal government, it's not just the state government that can provide money and prescribe the rent and income limits. Local government can do it too. So that's the option we are offering to developers. What we are saying to them is, under the law, if you come to the Affordable Housing Trust and persuade the trust to make you a loan, you then can set the rent and income on the affordable units in your mixed income project to a standard that's determined by the Affordable Housing Trust. And we aren't restricting people to crazy low state median income. We are saying to people, you can use 80%, not 70, of the area median income, not the state. That is a tremendous financial advantage to the developer. We don't let them keep it all to themselves, I assure you. What we ask them to do is, in exchange for that financial advantage, we ask them to do one of two things. Either build something materially smaller than they would have had to build if they were following the standard statutorily prescribed 70% at state median, or give us more than 30% of your units that are rent and income restricted as affordable. So far, in the 2 years that the trust has been under operation, I think we have probably talked to, I'm going to say, 18 to 20 different developers about 18 to 20 different projects. We have approved commitments for 6. the most recent one just yesterday. If you look at the 6 projects, 5 of those 6 projects came and opted to build something smaller. The average reduction in size was a little under 40%, which I think is material. I think that is a big deal. The one project that opted to give us more affordable units went from the minimum 30% required to, I think it was 42 or 43% affordable. That also, I think, is a pretty big deal. So that is the value proposition that the trust has been able to accomplish so far. To do that, the commitments that we have voted to approve have used about $350,000 of our $650 that we have from the ARPA money. There are half a dozen applications that are going to be coming in soon. I'm confident that we will approve some of those as well. We are going to run out of money before too terribly long, and we're going to need you guys to keep those cards and letters coming, big time. And we're also going to have, and I hope to have many more conversations like this about ways that we as a community could consider other funding sources for the trust. Go ahead, Margarita.
Okay, I have a mic now. That was what he turned to me before, and I said, that's okay. So when Bob talked about the poverty line, so you know it's $15,000 a year for a single person, $30,000 a year for a family of 4. And 6 to 7% of the folks that live in Greenwich are below that level. So when we're building affordable housing that's very cheap, it is for people who belong to us. They're often folks that we know. It's not that you're importing from somewhere far away. These are your own people, and I think that's important. The other thing, I came running in here today and I said to Bob, I found this data source online that says we have almost 35,000 jobs in town. 35,000 jobs, and very few of those people live in town. So when you complain about the traffic, it's because there are people with all kinds of jobs who can't afford to live in town. Some of those folks are making great salaries but still can't afford it. What Bob is doing with the trust is that the area median income, 80% of the area median income is still around $150,000 a year. So you have people who are commuting into town who may be making $150,000 a year but still can't afford to live here. And so you're creating housing for them. That's another opportunity that you have. And some folks turn to us and say, but that's not affordable housing. Well, it is, because it is housing that you are not able to supply in the normal market. So that's how we're looking. So it's varied. There's a fear when people hear the word affordable that, and believe me, we know about that fear because we've heard some very funny comments over the years at P&Z hearings, that it's, they're gonna be selling crack in the hallways or whatever. But it is a huge range, and it is folks that are working. It isn't folks that are unemployed. It is folks that have jobs and can pay rent. So, okay, so that's all about the need. When we wrote our affordable housing plan, we addressed something else. Beside the need, we looked at where can we build housing? What can we provide? Greenwich has some very significant limitations. We are infrastructure limited. We have aging infrastructure, no fault of our own. The whole state looks like that. But we're very limited in how much sewer capacity. Sewer is offered in a small part of town. The other thing that limits us, it's really interesting to look at on a map, is how few north-south and east-west roads we actually have. So we don't have good through transit in town. We have limited public transit opportunities. So if you're going to bring someone, if you're going to create a home for someone, how are they going to get around, and where are you going to place these homes? It's very difficult to do in the backcountry. I mean, quite frankly, the state has talked about eliminating our 4-acre zoning, and okay, but how are you going to build big when you have no infrastructure? And that's always been our answer. So we wrote in our plan, we talked about how we were focusing on the areas that have infrastructure and that can accommodate it. One of the things that we need to do is look at how building this kind of housing would reduce our traffic as well. So right now, so many people are driving into town. Those of you who live near a north-south road, Round Hill, Lake, North Street, you know what it looks like in the morning. Glenville just had the forum, they complained. All those roads are so trafficked now, and what's happening is folks that work in town are commuting in. Some of those people lived in town, you'd reduce the traffic. So there's a trade-off in there, and how do we find it? I think we need to do more studying so that we get the right balance. It's a hard question to answer, but there's a number there where you can make your town better balanced and reduce the traffic, I think. What else? I did infrastructure, we did demographics. You all know that we're very racially diverse. That surprises everybody always. We have a much higher Hispanic percent. Hector and I take great pride in contributing to that, of course, but we have a higher Hispanic percent than, oh, right, and Romulo. Where's, we take, ahí estás. We have a higher percent of Hispanic population than many other places in Connecticut. We do have a lower African-American population, but we have a lot of Hispanic. Another number that's fascinating is something like 23% of the folks that live in Greenwich were not born speaking English. So when you look at our school scores, that's what we have to spend time on, is we have a lot of kids who aren't speaking English at home, and they speak lots of different languages because we're also a very international community. So we have to build for that diversity. Okay, I think I hit all the demographics, all the infrastructure.
We have a question.
Yay. Mr. Arseno. But we're not going to give you a microphone. Not a working one. You can't have a working microphone.
You did.
It's working?
The green
Yes. Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. And for whom probably most of you knows me, I am Hector Arseno, a state representative for the 151st District. I'm very happy to be here today. And a couple of just footnotes to what we had been hearing today. And this is a great panel, and I'm so happy to see support from the town coming to the Affordable Housing Trust, to the Affordable Housing Plan. And for the governor, housing is probably the #1 priority in the state. I mean, he had committed to bring business to the states. He's doing that. The first questions when companies from overseas and domestic come to Connecticut to invest is where my workforce will be living. That is the first question they ask. The second question is about schools. The third question is about taxes. But the first one is housing for the workforce. And that will continue to be a #1 priority for the governor and for this administration. Clarification to what Fred said at the beginning. On the late part of the session, we were very close to pass, and the housing bills originated in the House of Representatives. And we were very close to bring to the floor what by those days was a combination of 3 bills. Margarita might remember that. We texted quite a lot. Became to known as the House Majority Bill. That was how the bill was known. That bill did not make it to the floor, Fred, and many people spoke, but many of us and the 3 representatives from Greenwich worked behind the scenes to be sure that that bill, and the House Majority Leader knew our position, will not bring it to the floor. So we worked very hard, to the point that the next following day, when we were criticized, I don't know why, by a committee in town, a political party in town, in the social media, the president of Connecticut 169 wrote to the chair asking to stop criticizing the Fairfield County representatives that were very hard to have a good bill. So, yeah. Finally, I've been talking about this subject since I decided to run for public office, and many know that in committees I spoke always the same way, the same words. I'm very supportive. I took the time to visit every single development, and this is a solution. But also what Greenwich Communities is doing is the solution. This is part of the solution. And we have to bring to Hartford, if we want to just keep local zoning control, as we all committed to, we have to bring solutions. And we have to work all together for that. Last point that I will make is that House bills will be in the floor, and we will continue working on them. But the House Majority Leader is working bipartisan. Ryan can testify on that. You've been in meetings that you were called, like other members of party, to work together to bring solutions. And that's what we have to do. Thank you very much.
That's not working. Thank you, Hector. I appreciate it. And Ryan, again, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your testifying up there. It was very much appreciated. Yeah, and certainly what people say here, you have to be very careful, because the 3 reps and a state senator are up there trying, and sometimes when I was in the state house, sometimes people would say something here and they don't think they meant it, but sometimes they put us in a difficult position up there. So I'd ask people to call up the people who are representing us and talk to them. And if you don't feel they're speaking up enough, then talk to them. Certainly, I do think, Hector, though, publicly speaking out a little bit more, I think is helpful. Having worked up there bipartisanly in a bipartisan way for 11 years, most of my bills that I wrote and got passed, and I would have never got passed without the other party. So you have to really work together. But I think people want to just see not only that everybody has our backs here, but also that Greenwich, just telling Greenwich's story. And I'm glad you mentioned Greenwich communities, because that's the main thing that's been really getting that number up there. But this housing trust fund under, Bob and the commissioner and the committee members here that are in the front row tonight, this really has a great potential to piggyback on that and to really get us up to where we need to be. If we have some of the projects that are on tap, just with Greenwich Communities alone, in the next couple of years, could get us up to close to 7%. That's a big deal. And if we can get the legislature, while we're doing that, and Ned Lamont has been a great friend to Greenwich, always having our back up there and telling them that, as he said at Armstrong Court, when I gave my speech about local control, he said, Freddie's right. Greenwich doesn't need Hartford telling us what to do, because Greenwich is doing the right thing. But he said, if we don't do the right thing, they're going to come down on us. So this is a huge, signal to the state that we're doing that. So thank you all.
I'm glad we're getting questions, because otherwise you'd have to listen to me for another 10 minutes.
Unfortunately, you're not really getting questions. I didn't plan to speak tonight, but I did want to especially because Hector spoke, I did want to add my thanks to the work of the Housing Trust. I think it was the last vote I cast on the RTM was in favor of the Housing Trust. And when I first learned about it, I actually didn't quite understand what the real purpose was, what the real value add was. But the more I learned about it, it was a really well thought out plan. It was a really elegant solution and kind of arbitrage of the rules that exist under 830G that will enable us to build more affordable housing in town, but also do it in a way that the town supports. And for any solution, for any progress, politically and economically, you need community buy-in. You can't force a square peg down a round hole. And that's one of the main, I think, problems about 830G. 830G has been on the books for 30 years, but it creates this kind of contradictory or paradoxical situation where towns actually have a disincentive for allowing kind of the workforce housing, the middle housing from being built, because it only adds to the denominator, the denominator of 10% that you're required. So it actually, if you build a single bedroom, you're renting it out for $1,600 or maybe it's now $2,000 a month, that wouldn't qualify if you're not deed restricted or if it's not government housing. So even though that's affordable in the broader sense of things, towns have a disincentive under 830G. So it creates this logjam, this paradoxical situation. And part of what I'm attempting to do in the conversations that I have with my friends across the aisle in the state legislature is say that we do need to reform 830G. And we also need to make progress in adding to our housing stock. And those are the exact types of conversations now we're having with the majority leader who advanced a bill called Fair Share this term, which passed the Housing Committee, was not able to pass the full legislature, but in some form, the calculation and the bureaucracy did pass. So they still need to pass the full mandate, but he was able to pass the creation of the bureaucracy and the creation of the calculations, which would eventually create a new mandate, which could double the 830G mandate on the town effectively. And so I'm spending most of my time on that because I am on the Planning and Development Committee, which is one of the two committees of cognizance for housing and zoning issues, the other being the Housing Committee. So one of the other bills, Work, Live, Ride, we spent 14 hours one night debating. So that was my primary responsibility for 14 hours debating against a bill that would essentially eliminate zoning in areas around bus stations and train stations. And the last day of session, leading 9 hours of debate against the Fair Share bill on the Senate floor until the Senate Majority Leader, through a parliamentary procedure, passed it in the last couple hours before the end of session. So, But the most powerful advocate, I think, for our town, for local control, is when we have people like Margarita Albin, when we have people like Danielle Dobbin from Westport, when we have people like those who have worked on the Housing Trust in Greenwich testify that we are working in a thoughtful manner, in a pragmatic manner, to advance our affordable housing goals in town. That's extremely disarming because it kind of breaks down a preconceived notion that many people in the state legislature have about our town, about Lower Fairfield County. Places like Greenwich, places like Westport are working very hard. Places like New Canaan, which just added, I think a couple hundred units at Canaan Parish, they're working very hard to advance their goals, but they don't want to do it in an all or nothing way. They don't want to do it without local input. So to the extent that we could bolster the Affordable Housing Trust, to the extent that Greenwich Communities keeps doing good work, that actually helps us in Hartford. So again, I do want to encourage support for the Affordable Housing Trust. I do want to thank Bob and the Affordable Housing Trust, Bob and his envelopes and the Affordable Housing Trust for their work and the buy-in that we've seen in the community from the RTM, from our first selectman, and so on. So again, thanks for holding this forum. Thanks for giving me a couple moments to not ask a question.
Thanks, Ryan. We have several questions.
So I just have a question because I thought tonight's meeting was about the tools we have and that we're not maximizing. And the most interesting thing to me is I remember when I was on the RTM, what I found very problematic about the HG, I always get the name mixed up, was that the salary you could make was so low, it wouldn't be for our people. And I love that this is the 80% of our average income, which to me would really address the 35,000 people that are commuting. And I feel like I would love a target that the 6 units you've done have solved how many people's problems?
Oh, wait, I'll tell you just some numbers for you. In the 30-plus years that 830G has been on the books, it has given Greenwich 32
Yeah,
affordable units.
that's what I was afraid you would say.
32 affordable units. That's right. This is 830G mixed income, private developer projects, 32. The 6 projects that the trust has approved, I'm going to just give you an
Wing it.
estimate.
Yeah.
It's about 150 affordable units.
That's impressive. I mean,
And I'll tell you a couple more little stories. The trust, the very first thing we did, we thought, let's do something really easy. The land cost is the biggest hurdle to affordable housing. The way that Greenwich Communities does anything is they build on town-owned land that is leased to them for $1 a year. Let's look and see if the town or the state has any other land. A group of us got a list of every piece of property owned by the town and started digging in, and that inspired, honest to God, that inspired Sam Romeo to propose to the Board of Selectmen the other day to develop an affordable property on top of the parking lot at the Coscob train station.
wow.
That's the sort of thing that we need to be doing more of. I'll tell you another little story from my background. I would really, really love to get our Affordable Housing Trust to the point where it can do this sort of thing. And it's going to take money. In my day job, I manage 2 operations. One is a nonprofit that has owned 25,000 units of affordable housing. Another is a group of people who are much smarter than I am. They actually build affordable housing for limit. They've done about 10,000 units. They are right now in lease-up on a 145-unit property in Raleigh, North Carolina. It cost $30 million to build. The mortgage that is sustained by the net income from that rent at the restricted rents minus the regular operating expenses, the mortgage only provided 30% of the cost of the project. Federal low-income housing tax credits provided most of the rest, but the project was $2.5 million short. If you're $2.5 million short, you build 0 units. Nothing happens. We went first to the county, and the county gave us $2 million of the kind of money that I want our Affordable Housing Trust to be able to loan. This is the way we're structuring it, you want to put the last dollar in that gets the project built. And it isn't a huge amount to be that last dollar. We thought the $2 million would get us over the hump, but it didn't. We needed another $1.5 million. So we went to the town, and they said, yeah, we have a trust, and we'll give you $1.5 million, very soft money, meaning they can't foreclose if we can't pay, because the property's only going to produce money to sustain the first mortgage. They gave us $1.5 million, but they said, we have a condition. We think that our town needs housing for veterans. So we will give you $1.5 million if you put 40 of your units, reserve them for veterans. And that's what we did. That town had us as private developers help them address what they considered to be a critical need. We got a project built that provided 145 units of affordable housing, 40 of which were devoted to veterans. I would love for us at the Affordable Housing Trust in Greenwich to be able to do something like that someday.
So actually, my second thing would be, I would love a increase in teachers who live in town, firemen who live in town, police who live in town.
There you go.
And if that's 10% is 3,500 people, what do we have to raise to get 3,500 people in town? And just turn it into a discussion of, we as a very wealthy town should have these local people live in town.
Yep.
And just what you said, you just explained how you do it.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
And
just turn the discussion into that, because I get sick of always pointing somewhere else. Somebody else is going to do it. Someone else is not going to do it.
we don't have to do it all by ourselves either. Margarita and I had lunch with the Commissioner of Housing of the state of Connecticut, who said to us she has $600 million, $600 million of money to put to work. And if we could find a way to augment other publicly available sources, first mortgages, low-income housing tax credits, home funds, HUD money, the state would be very happy to put some of their money into projects. We would have a much, much more powerful calling card to help Greenwich communities or private developers who we could attract to our town to do this for us if we could put in some material money as well.
So I'd love you to turn it into what we have a moral obligation to do, and don't let the mechanics get in the way. No.
We have more questions. Somebody. Brooks.
Thank you. For those who followed the Affordable Housing Trust since its start a couple years ago when it started in the RTM, this is really a remarkable vehicle, because in an environment where every single debate in the RTM pits two sides against each other in a very strident way, this actually didn't do that. And the reason is because it really appeals to two very disparate groups of people who normally would be fighting but agree on this. And that is one group who feels that we should invest as much as we can in affordable housing because we need it and it's the responsibility of society to provide. And on the other side are the people who are frustrated that Hartford wants to take over our zoning and tell us what we have to produce and where we have to put it, and we can't control that ourselves. These two disparate groups came together to affirm this solution, which does that. And so my question, Bob, is could you give the group a concrete example of the type of 830G set-aside that would be allowed to be built in this town based on the rules from Hartford, and how the assisted project that we ended up sponsoring was much more consistent with the norms of the town, and also talk about the minimal investment we had to make to achieve that objective. Thank you.
Sure, that's pretty easy. There are, as I said, 6 projects that we have voted to approve. I'm going to describe one of them. It's been in the press recently. It's on the corner. It's on Greenwich Avenue. We think about the Bank of America building. The project was proposed as a 6-story, 60-unit project. We were approached by the developer and had a conversation with them. We went back and came back and asked the trust for a whopping $100,000 loan. Now, this is a multi-million-dollar project. $100,000 is not going to move the needle. But what it did was it enabled us to let them shift to 80% of area median instead of being stuck at 70% of state median, crazy low, and ask them, you pick. We would like you to either build something smaller or give us more affordable units. They came back and said, we'll knock 2 stories off the building. I think that's terrific. The building that they proposed fit right in with much, much better with what was around than a 6-story monster. If you've read in the press, that application was subsequently withdrawn from planning and zoning, and the 6-story is back on the table. The reason I understand is that the neighboring property is protesting everything that they can think of to protest. And the developer decided, look, if I'm going to be in court anyway, let me just have the simplest lawsuit, that I can possibly have. So I'm not going to give the neighbor the opportunity to challenge what the trust is doing. We're just going to go straight down the middle. But I'm still hopeful that project will come back, because it's an example of somebody, the developer, who really doesn't want to build something that big, and we give them the opportunity to do it. Was that close enough, Brooks?
Sure, absolutely. What are the terms of the investment? Is it a loan?
Yeah, what we're doing is we are proposing, at least, to make these investments as loans. I'm in conversation right now with the town legal department and some members of the BET about how to structure that, consistent with the ARPA, the federal ARPA rules. But we would ask in exchange that the property be deed restricted for 40 years for at least 20% of the units as affordable. Many of our projects, we're asking for more than that, 25 and in some cases 30% affordable. The interest rate on the loan, we're trying to set a little bit above the developer's first mortgage rate. We will obviously have to be a subordinate loan, secured, subordinate to the first mortgage. And we'll have to, I'm sure there will be some back and forth with the first lenders, but this structure is exceedingly common in affordable housing. Yes, ma'am.
How do other communities fund their affordable housing trust? Can you repeat the question so that,
How do other communities fund their affordable housing trust funds?
And I'm going to, so we've had a lot of debate about this in Greenwich. That's a great question. For all of you who didn't hear it, it's how do other communities fund their affordable housing trusts? To our knowledge right now, there's Darien, Stamford, New Canaan, and Ridgefield and Westport are working on them. They all use a fee from development projects that come into town, or what's called fee in lieu. We are the only ones who do it by purely volunteer donations. We did that because of the conflict about using, there was an internal debate about using town resources to fund affordable housing. And we thought that it would turn into too much debate over that topic. And we wanted to get it going and to have people see the merit first. Brooks is thinking about this because he remembers some of the discussions. So, for example, if you go to build something in a town, you pay an extra fee as the developer, and that goes into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The other option is that most towns are beginning to require that everybody have a percentage of below market housing in any apartment building they make. If they don't want to do that, they get to pay money into the trust instead. It's a fee that they pay instead of building the below market housing. That term, that zoning term is inclusionary zoning. And what you can do is give people the alternative to pay into the trust. I don't know which way Westport's going to go. They're a very thoughtful town, and as you all have picked up, we're pretty close to the Fairfield County towns on planning and zoning. We talk to them a lot about what they're doing. Mostly, to be honest, we've been talking about how to fight Hartford, and how to give Hartford good ideas. Sorry, Hartford people. That came out really badly. So, but that's what's been happening. Does that answer your question? We can revisit that in the future, but we wanted to start it as a volunteering, as people doing it because they wanted to.
And I can try to add some more color to that from a more nationwide perspective. There are hundreds, literally hundreds.
Thousands,
probably thousands of.
Last time we looked, there were
More than 1,000.
huge, yeah.
Yeah. The ones that are most prolific, like the Mecklenburg County and Raleigh ones that I mentioned in my little story, They do it by issuing bonds. The city of Durham just did, 2 years ago, did $75 million of tax-exempt bonds, put all of the money into a housing trust, and embarked on a plan of making these gap loans, this last dollar in loans, to make projects that were receiving mortgage loans from conventional sources and tax credits, make them actually feasible in this economy. Though I would, to the extent that you can get projects that are able to repay the loans in theory, the repayment of the loans in theory repays the bonds. I say in theory because I'm not going to try to hoodwink you. These projects are not cash cows. They are the exact opposite. The reason that the first mortgage on these properties, as in my example, only covered about 35% of the construction costs was because it doesn't have a huge amount of cash flow to repay all these loans. So the bonds are backed by they're general obligation bonds, backed by the taxing power of the town. But the towns that have done this have made the decision that it will increase the town's overall economic status, drive more revenue, bring more jobs, make it a better, more vibrant town to have more people living closer to where they work.
Are they doing anything to stop the further development of the houses that are not affordable? Because it's getting so crowded, that's one of my concerns. I mean, they have to put the affordable, but then are they going to slow down the non-affordable so that we don't have too much going on?
You want to try that one?
Okay, that's a zoning question.
Yeah.
The question was, are we doing anything to slow down development of big single-family houses in town? And the answer is, we've made small steps to make it, our biggest focus is to make it environmentally acceptable and to work on the sustainability. And Peter Berg may remember this date. It was before I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission, 2005, I believe. We reduced the size that a house could be in Greenwich. And the Planning and Zoning Commission had to have police in the room during the hearing. Okay. So the Planning and Zoning Commission tries to make regulations that respond to what resident vision for the community is. And the outcry from the community that we would reduce people's right to build single-family houses was enormous. So if there was an outcry, the commission would respond. But I don't want to be too geeky, but the way we work is we go out into the community and we have public workshops for about a year and a half where we ask people what they want to see happen in town. At the end of that period, we write a 10-year plan for the town about how it's going to look. And it's based on all the input. We have a book this thick that it's based on. All the workshops, all the surveys we did. And then we go to the RTM with that plan, and 230 people have to vote on it. The regulations we write have to be consistent with that vision that the public had of what they wanted to see happen in Greenwich. And nowhere did we hear, we don't want to have mansions anymore. I mean, we did, but not an overwhelming voice. I shouldn't say, nowhere did we hear it. Yeah, there are people who feel, why do folks need 10,000 square foot houses? But there you are.
Or just the apartments that are really expensive? Townhouses that are super expensive too, those are also.
We can't change how those are priced. People come in and they build what we'd like to do is to require anybody who builds an apartment building to have something that is below market in that building. We would probably start it at 6 or 7 units. Anything that's over 6 or 7 units would have something that is below market, and it would be at that 80% of area median income. Again, it would be to accommodate town workers first so that the project remains economic. But we haven't heard an overwhelming push to reduce the size of buildings. If we did, we'd change the regulations, because that's our job, to respond to the public.
Andy, you had a question?
Mr. Deuce.
I'll make Jenny happy because I'll come up here and give my name. I'm Andy Deuce.
The people on TV can't hear anything these people are saying, so that's.
Oh, so that was why we repeated the questions. Thank you.
Yes.
Don, none of these people can hear.
Anyway, I'm better known as Nancy Cooper's husband, and I'm following up on her earlier question. To put some numbers, my interest really is getting more town workers living in town. And I understand the 80% of the local threshold, and that is about 130,000 or so. Is that Sanford?
155,000. No,
Okay.
no, it's the, to be technically correct, it's the Norwalk, Stamford,
here-
Greenwich corridor.
Okay, here's my question. What percentage of our town workers earn incomes less than that and do not live in town currently? That may not be answerable, Fred, but
I haven't,
That would take some research.
I have the numbers at home. I don't have them here with me.
Yeah, and also,
Let's
I
see.
mean, some of them who are able to work overtime could get there, but not many. And obviously, department heads will, but I can get that, we can get that. for you.
this is important to know because if it's a big
Department
problem, opportunity,
heads-
we should.
Family,
It's a family.
155. So we did some work on this when we wrote the affordable housing plan. I just didn't bring it in with me. We looked at how much people were making in town and where they lived. And this is interesting. A lot of the people who make big salaries in town still don't live here. So for them, it's a choice. On the other hand, there's a lot of the lower income people who don't live here, and we don't know if it's a choice. One of the things we'd like to do, I'm dying to do this, is I'd like to survey, I haven't told Fred yet, I'd like to survey the town employees as to if there was housing, would they live here?
Yeah, my hope and expectation is if you begin your career with the town of Greenwich, you probably want to live here. And if you start living here, you may not move out when you have the higher salary, is my guess.
Yeah,
Let me give you a number. Chief Healy
okay, Hector,
Yeah.
nobody can hear from
Okay,
the,
I'm done. Thank you.
Let me give you a number.
Okay.
When Chief Heavy moved into town, or started working in the police force, 75% of the police force live in Greenwich. Today, do you know the percentage? 7%. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. That's probably pretty close to being correct, if not correct. But you're right. What we found is growing up here, people were able to live here because housing expenses did not get away from everybody at that point. But in the last 40 years, 30 years, if you talk to town employees, policemen, firemen, teachers, some would live here a little bit at the beginning, and they get an apartment they'd share with people. A lot of my friends did that. And then we get married, and they wanted some land. And as you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, as the prices escalated, they went to Monroe, they went to Trumbull, right? They went to places where they can get 2 acres, 4 acres, and they raised their families there, and they were very happy, and they didn't come back. So that was the issue there. I know when I was in the legislature, I had a bill that would have allowed the ADA units, the ADU units, the apartments,
Accessory dwelling units.
accessory dwelling units to be counted. And I got a hearing with the housing committee, and they were smiles, and I thought I was going to get an affirmative vote, and they shot it right down. But the whole point was to allow first-year policemen, firemen, teachers to live in the community that they just got a job in. And also, likewise, to have maybe an elderly person who may be house rich and income poor, to have somebody live in there, security-wise, but also to give them a little bit of revenue to allow them to stay in the town where they raised their kids, they volunteered. And unfortunately, a lot of people were forced out as prices went up. they had to go down south because they were house rich and income poor. So I thought my bill would have helped that. The legislators, mostly from urban areas, thought that the suburban towns were trying to get around 830G. And some of them were good friends of mine. They came to me and said that they're not going to buy it. And they said, "You're lucky you got a hearing because we like you." But they gave me false hope, and and none of those bills ever got passed out. But we had good conversations, but there was a distrust by certain legislators in urban areas of suburban ones, and it didn't matter what party. They just thought you were trying to get around affordable housing, which wasn't true, but that's what the perception.
Any other questions?
Good, right?
Yeah, and Nancy's question is one we hear frequently, and that's why, again, I think the Affordable Housing Trust, in terms of what the town can do, is a very unique mechanism for building that just above the traditional definition of affordable housing, lowercase a affordable housing. That can be more accessible for people like town employees who are on probably towards the lower end of the wage scale, because otherwise it's 70% state median income, as Bob said, and this gives us 80% of area. It's also why it's a two-front battle for us to create a more rational housing policy that I think our town will buy into, and that will help us economically, meaning specifically Reform 830G. And I had several bills with a Democratic legislator from Bethel that goes down this road of counting naturally occurring affordable housing, so the non-deed restricted, non-government housing that is more affordable, which will then, by giving the towns credit for it, again, the $1,600 one bedroom but non-deed restricted, non-government unit, that kind of, I think, meets the desire that we have, but gives town credit for that, therefore creates greater incentive to build it. And then any other number of reforms. It's a very complicated law, but the only way to really get there is by bringing reforms to 830G that I think will increase the housing stock of the state, but do so in a way that towns accept. But the only thing we have left to us here, I think, that really fits that need is the Affordable Housing Trust, and why it's important work. What Greenwich Communities is doing is also very important, but it meets a different need that our town also wants to meet. And again, if we can find another town or city in the state that has increased its affordable housing stock by 9% in just 4 years, I'd be surprised to see it. So what Greenwich is doing, and then obviously what Margarita is doing on planning and zoning too, having a logical way, a prudent way of expanding the housing stock through things like accessory dwelling units, through things like mixed-use residential. The town is working very hard in a very smart and practical way under the leadership, and that's something that helps us have a better entree into those discussions in Hartford, as difficult as they are.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Somebody in the back?
Question? Yes.
Oh.
One quick question, this might have been answered.
You have to come to the microphone, Mr. Wells.
Evening, folks. I came in a little late, so this might have been answered. One, has there been any thought given to funding the trust through like a real estate transfer fee? And two, can this money go to mixed-use developments? For instance, I was on the call earlier when the Coscob train station proposal came up. Great idea. One thing that stood out for me was that, why is that all residential? And I had some other critiques, but I'll get in there later on the process at the proper time. But one thing that I thought would be a great addition would be a daycare center or something like that, right? So the individual's living upstairs, you drop your kid downstairs, right, and you hop on the train. So you're not going anywhere. Or, you grab your coffee downstairs. It also, brings life to the area. Can the trust, funding go toward something like that, or is it strictly residential?
No, we need to be funding residential, but if you want to have influence over what gets built, the best way to do it is to put that last dollar into the development. That story I told about the North Carolina project that my company is doing. We had no clue. We had no desire. It wasn't our plan to provide veterans housing. The town said to us, I've got $1.5 million for you. It's the last dollar you need to build anything. We'll give it to you, but we absolutely could provide funding and have some sort of influence over what gets built.
And one of the legislators is going to have to hit this one, but we send conveyance tax money to Hartford that we never see. And one of the things would be to get some of that back and have it go to the trust. And to any money that is being paid by us into the state, have something returned if it's a state priority to build affordable housing. I wanted to add to what Bob said. So the Housing Authority, Greenwich Communities, is able to go to the lowest tier of income in a way that a private developer can't, because they get funding. So one of the things that the trust has focused on is who else can't live in Greenwich besides the lowest tier. So that's why the 80% makes so much of area median income makes so much sense. It's combined with Greenwich Communities. And they know that now.
Yes.
Madam Moriarty.
Leslie Moriarty, I'm on the BET. I just want to encourage, if there's this much support for the activities of the trust, one, individual support, but you said it at the beginning that there's $450,000 of the ARP funding that's tied up on a condition for matching funds. And in 1 year or so of existence, you've raised $33,000. So that 450 target's a pretty large one for you to obtain. If this project has support and has Mr. Camillo's support, has RTM support, then I think it would be good for the BET maybe to show its support and reduce that condition and give that money in. But we need to have that conversation, and I think it's important for the activities.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you. And I promise I did not pay her to say that. When I lead meetings at work, I have what I call the 5-second rule. And that is when a conversations get to the point where there's silence for 5 seconds, that means the meeting's over.
They don't live in Greenwich.
Are we, does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap up?
No, ahí viene Héctor.
Since I put my money where my words are, a month after you launched the Affordable Housing Trust, I donated to the trust.
Nice.
And I hope that everyone else do it. Okay?
Yeah, I did promise the folks on the trust that I would not lock the doors and refuse to let you out until you donated.
But he's going to put envelopes in your pocket, I'm sure of it.
I'm going to hand out envelopes.
Thank you again, everybody, tonight for coming. This was very, very important. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Margarita.